Jack Smith has asked the Supreme Court to get involved preemptively in one of the cases against Donald Trump. And the Supreme Court responding here pretty quickly. Put this up on the screen. I'm going to give you all of the details momentarily. Supreme Court has agreed to consider Jack Smith's petition for it to establish whether Donald Trump is immune from prosecution. Trump has until 4 on December 20th to respond. Put the next piece up on the screen that gives the backstory here. So special counsel Jack Smith asked the Supreme Court on Monday to swiftly decide whether former President Donald Trump is absolutely immune from federal prosecution for crimes allegedly committed while he was in office. This has to do with the election interference case, not the documents case. One of the arguments that the Trump team has been making is, listen, these were things that were done when he was president of the United States, and we believe that means that he's immune. Jack Smith is arguing, listen, we need to expedite this process. We need to circumvent, we're going to skip the appeals level. We want the Supreme Court to decide this right now so that we can expedite this trial and get some sort of a resolution in a timely fashion, before we're in the height of the presidential election season and before there's a possibility of Donald Trump getting elected. So, Sagar, incredibly important, obviously, in terms of the campaign and in terms of the timeline, because one of the biggest questions with all of these cases hasn't been so much, will Trump be found guilty, but when will the trials unfold? When will there be a possibility of some sort of conviction? Is it going to conflict with the height of presidential campaigning? Is it going to occur after November when Trump can just, on the federal charges, get his DOJ to drop the charges, et cetera? So a major move by Jack Smith here, which is unusual but not unprecedented, to jump up to the Supreme Court and try to get them to expedite what's happening.
I actually think this is a good thing. And the reason why is it raises like these mega questions. And this is something, if people go watch our initial coverage on all this, something I teased. I was like, there are going to be a crazy amount of Supreme Court cases around presidential immunity, because the main question at hand before the court is around the immunity provisions of the president as previously established in DOJ policy and in some existing case law. But none of it has ever happened before where a president is actually being put on trial for deeds that allegedly occurred while he was the president of the United States. And not only that, he was the outgoing president of the United States. Actually, his successor had already been certified by the Congress, which raises just all kinds of crazy questions around presidential power, about what it actually means. The immunity claim itself is that Trump has said not only that he denies the truth of any allegations in here, but that all of the underlying charges against him occurred during his sitting presidency, which shields him from any prosecution, the initial immunity grounds. So the judge in the case has already rejected it, but this is like a Democratic appointed judge. I mean, even put that aside, it's not the way that this gets litigated. That's why it was immediately escalated and accepted now by the Supreme Court. Then it raises the even crazier political questions about Trump's got 3 people who he appointed to the bench. So are they going to rule against him? They have had no problem doing that previously, but this also falls into big questions that go beyond Trump, because people like Justice Alito and others, Brett Kavanaugh as well, are big defenders of the idea of the supreme executive and executive power. This is something that they've ruled about previously. Justice Thomas, probably a little bit more libertarian, maybe swing there as well. Obviously, I think I know all the liberals will go on there. Justice Roberts as well, we don't actually know, because he's also a big defender of kind of the unitary executive model and what that looks like for presidential power. So there's actually some major constitutional questions that are at play before the court.
So just to make it really clear to people in case it's not, what the Trump team is arguing is basically that if you're president of the United States, you can do anything, you can break any law, and you have complete and total immunity forever. The analysis that Jack Smith is offering here is that you can't be charged while you are president, but if you commit crimes during your tenure in office, then after you are out of the presidency, you can be charged and you can be found guilty for crimes that you committed while you were president. The legal analyses that I saw, for what it's worth, seem to indicate that they thought it was more likely that Jack Smith would prevail on this question, and that, Trump's assertion that, listen, you're immune for absolutely anything you do, even if it's on the periphery of your powers as president of the United States, you're good to go for the rest of your life, that was likely to be rejected. elected. The bigger question again was the timeline. Will the Supreme Court take this up when this is, would be highly unusual for them to do so? Or are they going to let the appeals process play out and go through the normal sort of chain of command here in terms of the US judiciary, which of course would take a much longer period of time? And this is the Trump team's strategy. Their strategy is to delay as much as they possibly can to try to push things out to ideally after the election has already happened. And so Jack Smith coming in here to try to, short circuit that potential direction of their, of what they're doing here. Just a little bit of historical background. They write that the Supreme Court rarely moves with the speed that Smith is proposing here, but there is precedent for doing so in the 1974 case involving Richard Nixon and a subpoena for tape recordings issued during the Watergate investigation. The Supreme Court granted the government's request to resolve the dispute 1 week after it was filed and issued a decision less than 2 months later. I read another analysis that said this move of jumping over the appeals court and going straight to the US Supreme Court has been very rare in history, but actually has been used more frequently. I believe the number was like 19 times over the past several years. So it's become a little bit more commonplace. And interesting that the Supreme Court has agreed very quickly to consider this. So very noteworthy. This is probably, one of the biggest political stories in the country, hanging over whatever is going to happen in 2024. And really the timeline is kind of the key piece here. Also, another reminder of Trump's dominance in the Republican primary currently came yesterday in a new Des Moines Register poll. Put this up on the screen. Des Moines Register polls are considered, sort of like the best poll of Iowa and of potential caucus goers. They now find Donald Trump with a majority, an outright majority, 51%. In the state of Iowa. This is an incremental improvement from their last poll. They find DeSantis hanging on to the number 2 slot at 19%, Nikki Haley in third at 16%, Vivek is at 5%, Chris Christie at 4%. So that is where things stand today. And Sagar, one of the things
Well, it seems like the fellows over at the Daily Wire are at it again, because after the success of their last film, Terror on the Prairie, which streamed exclusively on the Daily Wire Plus and raked in a total of $13,115 at box offices worldwide, they're now releasing a comedy called Lady Ballers about dudes who decide to play in women's sports by pretending to be women. And I think that the screenshot behind me kind of tells you everything you need to know about the plot. It's a movie based on the one joke that conservatives have. Now, this movie features cameos from Ben Shapiro's female doppelganger, Brett Cooper, and Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh in drag, the old guy from the Daily Wire, Jeremy Boring, the CEO of the Daily Wire, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, and even Riley Gaines. Now, for those of you who don't know, Riley Gaines is the NCAA swimmer who tied for 5th place with Leah Thomas, a trans woman, and even though 4 other cis women beat her, she has managed to turn her being a sore loser into an entire career. And she's not necessarily mad at the cis women who beat her. She's specifically mad at the trans woman who she tied with. But now she's starring in a movie where she'll be able to live out her fantasy maybe as winner or runner-up. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Now, it might seem weird that the Daily Wire made a movie and just put themselves in the movie, but I can assure you that they all have extensive acting experience. For example, here's a role that Michael Knowles played before he became a conservative commentator.
That was... wow. Thanks. Have you not done it with men?
Mind if we don't get into that?
Oh, yeah, sure. It's not a lot, is it?
Can I get a towel? You want my number?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Riveting. You know, it's really hard to understand why his acting career never took off. Now, I don't think that I could play the full trailer due to copyrighted music that it contains, but I will link to it down below if you want to watch the full thing. But I do have to play at least a brief clip specifically of Ted Cruz's cameo because I have questions.
Excuse me, are these seats open? Never mind.
I don't get it. What's the joke? I don't know why they would include this in the trailer where they're presumably trying to gin up excitement to get people to watch the movie. I mean, if you are trying to generate some level of excitement over cameos, one, I don't think that Ted Cruz is going to do the trick. And two, just like tease the cameo, say featuring cameos from all these conservative dickheads. Don't put Ted Cruz in the trailer when there's like no reason for that part. Like I'm baffled by some of the things that they included in this trailer. But I've got to say that the movie does look funny, but not for the reasons they hoped, right? I think it looks funny because of how bad it's going to be. The writing specifically looks like ass, but I want to get to the plot so you can kind of understand what I mean since I can't show you the trailer. So
As the war between Israel and Hamas continues with no end in sight, representatives of the Islamic Republic of Iran have begun to saber rattle in an attempt to get Arab republics on the side of destroying the Jewish state. During an international forum in Doha yesterday, Iran's foreign minister said that the only thing Iran and Israel share is that both do not believe in a two-state solution, and that a referendum should be held to determine the fate of Palestine, with only descendants of those who lived there prior to 1948 being permitted to vote. Iran's involvement in the current conflict hasn't received very much scrutiny. For our next guest, editor-in-chief of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, it should. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thank you for having me.
So how should we think about Iran's current, what they've said about the conflict going on?
It's not just currently, it's for 44 years, ever since this regime came into power in Iran. Its mission has been to destroy the Middle East and the global community in terms of its instability, in terms of exporting terrorism, in terms of putting billions and billions of dollars annually into different terror proxies, including Hezbollah, Hamas, and the insurgencies in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen that we're seeing attacking U.S. assets. So when we're hearing more of this muscle flexing by Iran's regime, it only means one thing, that our foreign policy is weak and that they believe that they have the upper hand to continue making their threats, continue with their human rights abuses at home, continue with attacking our assets in the region, and of course, continue with their support of terror proxies that are, again, contributing majorly to the instability of not just the region, but the world as a whole.
It seems like the visual images of the atrocities happening in Gaza, the 18,000 people who have been killed in the last 2 months, the bulk of whom are women and children, the 10,000 estimated children that have been killed, the destruction of 80% of housing stock, et cetera, and the critique from the international community has actually had a significant effect on the public perception of Israel and Palestine, United States, such that demographic groups that once disproportionately favored Israel in this conflict are flipping the other way. If you believe that Iran are bad faith actors in all of this, what do you think should happen in Gaza that would not enable them to continue to say, well, look, there's a real humanitarian crisis going on here. The reason we should all be on side is to stop the humanitarian crisis that Israel is inflicting upon Gaza, as opposed to the framing that you offered, world domination, exporting terrorism, those kinds of things.
Right. Great question. And I love the way that you set it up very well. Most people do not know all the nuances that you just referred to, but I will start with this. There are two wars currently going on. One is in the Middle East between Hamas and Israel. It is not the first time we have seen Hamas and Israel fight. When you see Hamas and Israel fighting, that's where I alluded to Iran being the funder and the entity that trained these terrorists. So it's really a proxy war between Iran's regime and Israel, and that will remain in the Middle East. The other war that we're watching is the narrative war that is being pushed by the mainstream media, college campuses. We're seeing social media obviously being a huge culprit in all of this, in choosing sides based on these false narratives. You alluded to a death toll. There absolutely have been many innocent Palestinians killed. I'll be the first one to say that. We don't know the exact death toll because, again, it is coming from Hamas. It's coming from the Ministry of Health inside Gaza, which is run by Hamas. I will also point to the fact that many of these casualties are what we call collateral damage, meaning Israel, in its duty to defend itself and to eradicate Hamas, is going in and finding Hamas fighters, many times using their innocent civilians, babies, children as human shields, hiding them in hospitals, creating situations where their own constituents, their own civilians are in harm's way, not evacuating them in time, etc. Look, this is not pretty. It's war. And I think a lot of what is lost here is what happened on October 7th. I hear John Kirby really banging his head against the podium every other day when he has these press conferences, again, reminding reporters to start at the origin of all this, which is October 7th. Even if we want to go beyond that, this is a terror organization that is running or in charge of the leadership of the Palestinian people inside Gaza. So when people talk about the disproportionality, let's start with the fact that we're fighting, or the world is fighting, a terror organization with Israel doing the dirty work. It's very, very unfortunate that this has become so, choosing sides. I mean, in Los Angeles here over the weekend, we had pro-Palestinian protesters became very, very violent. They vandalized a church and many apartment buildings along the Wilshire Quarter near UCLA with graffiti. There were swastikas on 4 or 5 different buildings that I personally saw. I did a walkthrough early morning before they were able to cover up the graffiti. Now, it's a long stretch to connect a swastika with Bibi Netanyahu's policies in Israel. This has turned into open and unashamed anti-Semitism all over the world. And that's where we have to stop it. We have to correct the narrative here. And again, if people are really interested in the geopolitics of it, I remind you to go back and look at what Iran's regime is doing, where they're putting their money, how they're treating their own citizens, and ask an Iranian inside Iran who's been on the streets for the last year with the protests that unfolded after the 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was killed for not wearing her headscarf properly. Ask those women who are taking to the streets how they feel about their government, how they feel about Israel, how they feel about the war going on right now. You'll get a more accurate answer out of one of them than you will from the influencers who are leading the discussion on social media.
There's a lot there. I guess I can start by asking you, you said that this started on October 7th, but of course, as many people point out, this is a conflict that's been going on for 75 years, since the 1948 Nakba, during which 700,000 Palestinians were forcibly removed from their homes in Israel, and many of whom were forced into Gaza. The population in Gaza is largely, even before this crisis, an itinerant migratory population, refugee population. And of course, some of the most egregious early bombing campaigns that we saw in Gaza were those that were targeting, or at least they hit, whether or not they were targeting, hit various refugee camps like Jabalia within Gaza, and then, along with UN targets and other hospitals, churches, mosques, universities, and other places that seem to have no tactical or military relevance. Of course, we know that Israel has repeatedly claimed that Hamas is under every building an innocent person it has hit. But as we've just reported earlier this week on the show, an Israeli analysis, along with other international analysis, showed that Israel has been doing a worse job of avoiding civilians than any other conflict zone in the world in the last 20 years. The ratio of civilians that have been hit as compared to their own articulated stated targets has been wildly askew. That being the case, and given that this is rooted back in 1948, and the fundamental concern that is being raised by people in Palestine and much of the Arab world is the ongoing occupation of the people of Gaza and their inability
Wait,
to have their own
sorry,
state.
I have to stop you right there because there are a few things you said that are.
I didn't interrupt you, Ms. Lisa.
I just
I
make
didn't
sure that
interrupt
we're on the
you.
same page.
Well, look,
Go ahead.
I let you say what you wanted to say. You characterized the protests in ways that I would not. They were protesting Joe Biden's visit to LA. You made a lot of characterizations that I would personally object to, but I just want to narrow it down if I could and ask you about what do you say to people who say this conflict did not in fact start on October 7th, that prior to October 7th, Israel had already killed hundreds of Palestinians. The death toll of Israel killing Palestinians has always historically been higher than the other way around. And is the fighting ever going to stop if the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine aren't allowed to have their own freedom?
I mean, there's so much to correct here, and I say correct because this is what I do for a living. In terms of its history, you said so many things that are incorrect. In 1948, even prior to that, the Palestinians were offered two states. They were offered their own state, and at that
The best monthly.
Zelensky is trying desperately to secure the critical funding his country needs to defend itself against Russia, but time is running out. Just moments ago, House Speaker Johnson spoke to reporters right after his meeting with Zelensky ended.
The Senate has been MIA on this. The House passed H.R. 2 6 months ago, more than 6 months ago. It's been sitting and collecting dust on Chuck Schumer's desk. I have told him personally, I've told the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, that these are our conditions because these are the conditions of the American people. And we are resolute on that. It is not the House's issue right now. The issue is with the White House and the Senate. And I implore them to do their job because the time is urgent and we do want to do the right thing here. With that, I'll
As you just heard, Republicans are insisting they will not back more funding for Ukraine unless Democrats agree to major border policy changes in the United States. We're covering this story from all angles. Let's start with CNN's Manu Raju on Capitol Hill. Nick Peyton Walsh is in eastern Ukraine. Nick, we'll get to you in a second. Manu.
Yeah, despite these urgent pleas, Dana, nothing really has changed in terms of the dynamics on Capitol Hill. You heard Speaker Johnson right there, and that's been echoed down the line by Republicans saying that there needs to be a deal on immigration policy first to deal with the surge of migrants across the U.S. border with Mexico before they will allow more aid to Ukraine to move forward. But their proposals to clamp down on border security, deal with the issues about asylum policy, parole policy, things that Democrats say they simply will not accept, which is why we are seeing a round of finger pointing, despite the efforts by Zelensky to try to unite the two parties behind the Ukrainian cause, a division within Congress about how to exactly go about approving that critical aid. Now, you heard from Zelensky there, Johnson there, but in talking to senators as well, people who left that meeting that they had with Zelensky, it is clear that that divide over immigration still persists with no clarity about how they will get resolved.
I'm angry and I'm disappointed. Angry that we would consider walking away from Ukraine at this moment in their history. For almost 2 years, they have fought off the most powerful military in the world and given their lives to do it. And we said we stand by your side.
There is zero chance that an aid package to Ukraine and to Israel will pass the House without real meaningful border security.
Welcome to a special edition of RBN Live Tuesdays. I'm your host for today. I'm CJ. That stands for Compton J. That's just a name for social media. In real life, I go by Jay. And I'm really excited because this is the first time our guest has been on this. I'm pretty sure, maybe on Sabby's network. I'll ask him when I bring him on. But he is the news editor of the antiwar.com. This is where I go to get what I love about this website. You go there and it's a lot of different leads to article, or links, I should say, to different articles, some that are written by the website and some that take you to other news sources. So it's a great way, sort of a one-stop shop, at least to get you started. If you want to start with any sort of conflict, war, whatever term you want to use around the globe, this is a great resource. And I'll bring on Dave now. Dave Decamp, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good, Jay. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Like I was just saying, we use we use the website as a way, as a starting point with a lot of things that we cover, especially with foreign policy. And I started out with this clip because it seems like this is top of mind right now. I'm going to get right into it. Seems like this is top of mind right now as far what's on. It's so weird to say this is up top of mind. If there could be top of mind, this is like 1A, and then Israel's like 1B. It's the funding of Ukraine, because it's been stalled for several months, I believe. It went through a couple of potential speakers trying to, with this still laying in the background. I think they've diverted funds from one place to another to sort of cover this sort of gap in funding, as they would say. But Zelensky's here now. And what is your reporting saying on what is going on Capitol Hill with the funding of Ukraine and Zelensky's visit? And I'll bring up your article in just a second here.
Yeah, well, it looks like Zelensky's going to be leaving empty-handed because the Republicans are standing pretty firm on these border issues that they want the Democrats to make concessions on. I was really surprised to see, I saw Lindsey Graham today say they're not passing anything until the Democrats cave on the border. So, I mean, he's been one of the biggest cheerleaders for this proxy war the whole time, and said some of the most, insane rhetoric has come from him, calling for Putin to be assassinated. I think, there's probably a lot of things that explain this. One thing, obviously, is that these Republicans now, even the more hawkish ones, supporting Israel's slaughter in Gaza seems to be their priority now. And when it comes to the war in Ukraine, Ukraine is in trouble right now because, by my estimate, the U.S. still has between 4 and 5 billion to send weapons to Ukraine. But the Zelensky government has been reliant on funding from the U.S. to fund the government. I mean, the U.S. has been propping up their government for the past almost 2 years, and that money's dried up. And Zelensky's in trouble because it's pretty clear now that, once this war's over and they actually have a presidential election, if he allows them to have one, that he's in trouble. So that's why, we saw this story from me here. The headline is that he was pleading for more military aid, because that's what he was doing. I mean, there's nothing dignified about what Zelensky has done on Capitol Hill on Monday and Tuesday. He's begging now, and it doesn't seem like he's getting what he wanted. Now, at the same time, you got Biden still and other Democrats and committed to funding this war for another year. And Mike Johnson, the new House Speaker, he's saying once we get a border deal, we'll pass the aid. They're not saying they're not going to pass it. So there's still the chance that they continue funding this thing for another year. But still, it's just not looking good for Zelensky.
Yeah, it sounds like, because I'm following the story too, it sounds like what's holding up the funding, I guess you can look at it this way, is the Democrats refusing to come on board with any border sort of policy changes. Because if they did, like you said, the Republicans, they're not against funding necessarily as much as in principle as we would think, or I should say not all of them. Some of them are. But what strikes me is that, well, actually, let me ask you the question before I give you my opinion. Do you think if the Israel conflict never sort of popped off or never sort of upticked the way that it has after October 7th, do you think there would be this sort of ship jumping off the Ukraine ship of support from all these Congress members?
I don't think so. I mean, it's hard to say, but again, like there was this real issue before, the October 7th when everything really, popped off here, of the U.S. running out of ammunition, of NATO running out of, artillery shells that they're sending to Ukraine. And that sounded like it was a real issue for the U.S. military. So now they have this war in Gaza that they want to support. And Israel wants some of those same, the big cherished round now is the 155 millimeter artillery rounds. And the U.S. has sent over 2 million to Ukraine. And they're, at a rate that they can't produce nearly that many to keep sustaining this war in Ukraine. So I think that's a big thing, that this is the priority. Like when it comes down to it, especially for Republicans, Israel, supporting Israel, no matter what they're doing, no matter how many civilians they kill, that's the priority over Ukraine. And if they could keep Ukraine kind of at this stalemate that it's at now, I think that's fine with them. It's clear Ukraine can't beat Russia on the battlefield. Over time, Russia is probably going to be able to start gaining more territory. But for now, I think just keeping the conflict going, I think they're fine with, because they see, they know that if they ship more weapons over there, it's not going to really change anything on the battlefield.
Yeah, and that leads me to this segment in the article that briefly brings up the counteroffensive, and as far as it referring to describing what it is or the results, and that is, despite Ukraine's failed offensive, Zelensky is determined to continue the war, even as Ukraine top's general has said Ukraine forces have little chances of breaking through Russian defenses, and Ukraine is facing a manpower shortage. There's a couple of things I want to address here, but let's go to that thing that to me that's kind of stands out, and that is a manpower shortage. Now, you tell me if this figure is right. I've heard this, I can't remember. I think I heard it in, it was a State of the Union. I forget the name of the Republican that was interviewed, but he was saying the average age of the people in the Ukraine war is something like 43. Is that accurate? And can you speak to that, into this part when you say there's a shortage of manpower? What are you referring to?
Yeah, that sounds right. I've seen that elsewhere, that the average age is 43. And one thing I actually read in Bloomberg today, one of the things Zelensky told Republicans when he was making the pitch for more aid, that they were thinking about conscripting men over the age of 40 now, expanding the draft so they could draft people that are over the age of 40 to solve this manpower shortage. And, with this war, it's been very strange that we don't know how many Ukrainians have been killed. It's a really weird propaganda tactic, because I guess they don't want to know how many, the real human cost of this war. I know estimates in the hunt that hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have been killed. And, I would say 300, 400,000 is not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, that's a huge number of people. And, so when it comes to actual numbers, like how many people they're short of, what it actually means, it's tough to say. But I know this one thing I mentioned here in this article was this Time Magazine report, which was not very good for Zelensky. It quoted people close to him saying he's delusional, basically thinking that Ukraine can win the war. But one Ukrainian official said, even if the West gives us all the weapons that we want, everything we ask for, the F-16s, whatever they can get their hands on, that they don't have the men to use them. So apparently the manpower shortage is a pretty big deal, and they're cracking down on people trying to leave the country, trying to dodge the draft. And so it's just a really bad situation for the people in Ukraine that don't want to go fight this war. They're really cracking down and trying to draft as many people as they can now.
So it seems like the funding, it's like he's coming over not for funding about the war. I wonder if he's moved to sort of come here and beg, because the people who are getting their pensions paid, the people who are getting their salaries paid are the ones who are really putting pressure like, hey, we need to feed our families, because that would be a type of pressure that I wouldn't see that would go away anytime soon. But I do want to bring up this very short video, and it's of Chuck Schumer, because to your point about Zelensky still trying to convince people or Congress that somehow he could win this war, Ukraine could win this war. Chuck Schumer actually speaks about this, and I'll play it. It's less than 90 seconds, and then we'll comment on the other side here.
It was a very powerful meeting. President Zelensky made it so clear how he needs help, but if he gets the help, he can win this war. And he outlined in some great detail, the kind of help he needs and how it will help him win. Even many.
Now I'm gonna pause it here because it's one of those questions I just want to ask and put it out there, because of course I know the answer. Now, do you think it's like Chuck Schumer, of the people who come out of this meeting, he seems the most excited, and he seems the one who has described what Zelensky says in such terms that I haven't heard anyone else describe with such excitement, that that he said he's going to win, and he has a detailed plan to win. It's kind of one of those questions where I already know the answer. Do you think Chuck Schumer believes that, or he's just saying whatever he needs to say to get this money here, based on your reporting, of course?
Yeah, I mean, I would say he's just saying, this is just all part of the pitch to get the money. I mean, the idea that Zelensky outlined some plan that if you give us X amount of weapons, it means we could win this war. I mean, there's just no way that's true. Or maybe he did outline some plan, but there's no way it's a real plan, path to Ukrainian victory. There was a report in New York Times yesterday that said the U.S. and Ukraine are like looking for a new strategy on the counteroffensive, and that the U.S. is encouraging Ukraine to just hold the territory that it has for as long as it can, basically. I mean, so that goes to show, there's no chance of a Ukrainian victory in the sense of what Zelensky has defined as victory, which is pushing Russia out of all the territory it controls. So what is, curious to know what Schumer really means by victory here.
Yeah, and I was just about to switch up the video, and then I was thinking of the same thing. Like, what does he say after this? Because that's the point that I wanted to bring up. But he does go on, if I do remember, he does go on to sort of do more of these cheerleading sort of things and make these over the top promises. But listen to what he says here.
Many of our Republican colleagues talked about we are winning this war. And if we get the help if he gets the help he needs, he will win. On the other hand, he made it clear, and we all made it clear, that if we lose, Putin wins. And this will be very, very dangerous for the United States. So we cannot let Putin influence through any surrogate what we need to do for Ukraine. He also made one other point. He needs the aid quickly. If we don't give the aid quickly, several things will happen. First, the military needs, but second, Europe and many other allies will say, "What is going on here? They're not giving them the aid."
I mean, he's one of the shameless.
Sorry, I lost my sound. I just gotta try. I think I got to switch the headphones. I don't know if you could hear me. Sorry.
No, if you said anything, I couldn't hear you until just right now. No worries. But like I was saying, you get your audio all set up. What Chuck Schumer here now? This part here, I'm gonna play for you guys. Replay for you guys. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Let me type in here. He may not be able to hear me. I can hear you. Oh, you know what? I can hear you. Try going out and coming back into the room. All right, so that should work. All right, so he's having a sound problem all of a sudden. Let me see. Try going out and then coming back in. All right, so I'm gonna put you in the back, Dave. I think he's switching his cables. Let me give him a chance to get back to the screen so I can tell him what's going on.
Fuck.
Oh. Yeah, he still can't hear anything. His levels are moving. All right, he can't hear me anyway. I'm gonna put him in the back and just continue the segment and bring him back in when his audio is back on. So let me go back to the point. It's 2 points I wanted to comment on. Let me see.
Fuck, man.
Okay, let me see. I can hear you. Try going out and coming back in if you can hear that. There he goes. That should fix it. Hopefully that should fix it. Usually fixes it. Especially when you make any sound changes on here. Let's play it again, and when he comes back and I get the thumbs up from him, I'm going to put him back in.
And this will be very, very dangerous for the United States. So we cannot let Putin influence through any surrogate.
That part is the first part I wanted to address. So he's saying he doesn't want Putin to interfere with any surrogate. That is his way of saying anyone who dissents from giving money right away to Ukraine is being influenced by his surrogate. This is how they so easily it rolls off to their tongue where they say you're a Putin puppet just because you have an opinion that's different from the State Department and the military industrial complex. Let's continue.
What we need to do for Ukraine. He also made one other point. He needs the aid quickly. If we don't give the aid quickly, several things will happen. First, the military needs, but second, Europe and many other allies will say, what is going on here?
Europe and many other allies will say, what is going on here?
They're not giving them the aid.
Like Chuck Schumer is one of those that is just despicable, but I do have another clip that I want to go to. And because what's funny about this story on Ukraine is now we haven't heard really any major news on Ukraine besides the funding. We haven't really heard any major sort of developments in the counteroffensive, any major sort of development in taking any sort of land. Haven't heard any of that. But today, on the day that he's meeting with people in DC, look at what drops out of the Ukraine news sky. U.S. declassifies intel on Russia's staggering losses as Zelensky pleads for cash. So magically, they declassify shit that shows the number of death toll that on the Russian side only.
Political gridlock on Capitol Hill may be jeopardizing the fight against Russia in Ukraine. Right now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Washington pleading for Congress to approve more military aid for his country. Next hour, he's scheduled to sit down one-on-one with President Biden. This morning, he met with senators and House members arguing that the political bickering over Ukraine aid is exactly what Vladimir Putin wants to see.
And yet, so far, Republicans seem unmoved. Some GOP senators even walked out of their meeting. Also today, we have newly declassified U.S. intelligence about Russia's strategy and why.
I'm going to check on Dave really quick to see if his sound is better, if he can hear me. What's up, Dave? Okay,
What's up?
I can hear
Sorry,
you.
my microphone just decided to stop working. Can you hear me? Do I sound all right?
Yeah. Is it the same mic is working now or no?
No, this is just the built-in one now.
Okay.
I don't know
It
why
happens sometimes. I don't know how often you use StreamYard, but this actually happens pretty often, at least twice a week, where we have to tell somebody to go out. So I didn't know if it was your mic or if it was StreamYard.
Yeah, it was the mic. Sorry if you heard me cursing.
Actually, only part of it I did, but that's completely all right because we do that here. And you came back right at the right time. Because what I was saying is, you heard Chuck Schumer say that they could win this fight, and you spoke about how it's unusual that we can't, or we have not gotten the death toll count for the Ukrainian side. And I was saying how we hadn't really gotten any big news about the counteroffensive because they're trying to keep that on the hush and hush about them losing. Really hadn't gotten really major news until today, until the day that Zelensky comes to be in DC. Then this news drops here, and it says U.S. declassifies intel on Russia's staggering losses. So somehow, Dave, they don't know, they can't report the Ukrainian side losses, but they know Russia's side. And let's listen to what this segment says. It's about 5 minutes. I'll stop and start, but let's get to the actual number they say that Russia's on Russia's losses here.
Political gridlock on Capitol Hill may be jeopardizing the fight against Russia in Ukraine. Right now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Washington pleading for Congress to approve more military aid for his country. Next hour, he's scheduled to sit down one-on-one with President Biden. This morning, he met with senators and House members arguing that the political bickering over Ukraine aid is exactly what Vladimir Putin wants to see.
And yet, so far, Republicans seem unmoved. Some GOP senators even walked out of their meeting. Also today, we have newly declassified U.S. intelligence about Russia's strategy and why the Kremlin is aiming for a winter stalemate. We have CNN chief congressional correspondent Manu Raju. He is on the Hill, along with CNN reporter.
You know, I do want to stop it here and speak about something I talked about in yesterday's stream, and that's where you're starting to see a lot more. And I think you're starting to see a lot more where there's making a seamless change to a different segment without you telling you they're like there's no indication they're making a change. So it's unusual. I do a lot of watching of this corporate media, so it's unusual because what I believe why they're doing this is that it's to put a good and a bad together. Like if it's a narrative that's against what they want, they match it up right directly against the narrative that they do want. So that's why they add this here. And like I said, it's like a seamless change from speaking about Zelensky and the money to going to this declassified without really making a clear distinction. Now, listen to what she says about this declassified intel.
Katie Bo-Lillis. Manu, let's start with you. I mean, as we await this White House meeting, what are you hearing on the Hill?
Yeah, nothing has changed. In fact, the stalemate persists, and there are real fears that there's aid to Ukraine. Even the supporters who back aid to Ukraine believe that this will drag into next year, despite the urgent pleas by the president of Ukraine, who is poised to leave Capitol Hill empty-handed. He met behind closed doors with Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats, trying to make his case about why aid is needed. I'm told that he told senators he expected that they would eventually come through, and he indicated that the money would be looked at. There'd be significant accountability in Ukraine for federal dollars. And he met with the Speaker of the House and the House Democratic leader. But the fact of the matter is that Republicans are still insisting that there needs to be a deal to deal with the southern border with Mexico, to tighten immigration restrictions. They said that must come first before they agreed to approving aid to Ukraine, even as there is no path for a deal on immigration, as the two sides remain badly divided. Something that even staunch supporters of Ukraine aid, like Senator Mitt Romney, indicated must be dealt with first, immigration, before there's a deal on Ukraine.
Reality is that the House is not going to take up a Ukraine bill unless it includes securing the border to the level that existed under the three prior presidents. When people elect a Republican majority in the House, you have to listen to what they have to say.
Are you concerned that if there's no money, Ukraine could lose the war to Russia?
Well, that's always been a big possibility the whole time.
I mean, I've never thought they could win to begin with.
You hear that? What is your reaction? Because this is not the first time I've heard somebody sort of where that's not the topic, but you can hear them make comments like this, where it's like that's not anything I really thought would happen. I think it was Richard Haas on Morning Joe. What do you think when you hear a congressperson now say something like that and comparing it to what Congress has been uniformly saying about this, sort of pre October 7th? Like, what do you think of that dynamic and change in describing what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty amazing to hear him just say that. I never thought they could win. Yeah, because we've been hearing for so long that, this is the most important thing that in the world. Mitch McConnell said a few times that the biggest priority for Republicans is supporting Ukraine so they could beat Putin, so he won't march into Europe. So yeah, it seems like all the talking points are just kind of fading away as they're moved on to another issue. And going back to that declassification of these Russian casualties, so now they're saying over 300,000 Russians have been killed after we haven't heard anything about Ukrainian casualties, and we haven't heard any estimates about Russian casualties in recent months, from the U.S. So all of a sudden, the day Zelensky's in Washington, they put that information out. I mean, it's just such a transparent attempt to get more money for this war. And that's how some people in Congress have been trying to sell it now. I know Mitt Romney has said this, that they say, the battle lines haven't changed much. The counteroffensive has failed, but they sure are killing a lot of Russians is basically what they're saying, where they say that we're inflicting all this damage on the Russian military and no Americans are dying, only Ukrainians are dying. That's actually how they're trying to sell this thing. So I think it's part of that narrative to say, look how much hurt we're putting on the Russians. Don't you want to keep funding this? Which to us sounds insane, but I guess to some of the politicians they need to convince, it might sound appealing to them.
Absolutely. Now, in the same segment, they're going to pivot slightly again and give a little more detail about the Intel report that you just referred to. So let's let they bring in another reporter who gives a little more detail of that report.
Leaving Washington without any aid, unclear when and if that may happen. Guys.
Manu, thank you so much for the update. We want to bring in Katie Bolilis now because, Katie, you have some new reporting on this declassified intelligence report that was provided to members of Congress, and it's really providing startling details about Russia's losses on the battlefield.
Yeah, some pretty staggering numbers here, Boris. This intelligence assessment provided to Congress yesterday reports, and I'm going to give you some of these figures, reports that of the 360,000 troops that Russia sent into Ukraine initially and that made up their entire standing ground force prior to the invasion, of those, 315,000 have been lost on the battlefield. That's an 87%.
Let me ask you just a wide-ranging general question about the military-industrial complex. Has there ever been reports in past wars where there has been so-called leaked intelligence that says one thing and then it ends up not being true? Is there any basis in why I would think that, or any track record with the United States military forces?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a pattern in the history of, the U.S. And the wars that it gets involved in. Of course, the one that the most notorious one today is the WMDs in Iraq. Yes. But there's been, this goes along kind of at a smaller level than just WMDs. And do you remember the Russian bounty story that Russia put bounties on the heads of American troops in Afghanistan? That was what I do. 2019, 2020, it was when Trump was trying to negotiate a deal to withdraw from Afghanistan. It was so obviously fake and just an effort to block that withdrawal. And then a few years later, maybe not even that long later, there was another report. That turns out that wasn't true. So yeah, I think, we have every right to be suspicious and not just believe the things that benefit their narrative so much. Again, just the timing of this to put this out now.
And that's what was startling to me, is that wow, on the day of, you somehow now know the number of casualties. That is really weird and odd, but let it finish and then we'll comment And then I also want to bring in some talk about Israel, of course.
Reports that of the 360,000 troops that Russia sent into Ukraine initially and that made up their entire standing ground force prior to the invasion, of those, 315,000 have been lost on the battlefield. That's an 87% loss of Russia's standing ground forces before the invasion. Now, look, important to understand that Russia has been able to defray these losses. They have been able to lean on, for example, the Wagner Group with some of their convict fighters. They have also launched a number of conscriptions and mobilizations to try to sort of throw more bodies at this fight. So they have been able to defray some of these losses. Still, this assessment warning, and again, I'm going to quote from this directly, this assessment warning that the war has sharply set back 15 years of Russian effort to modernize its ground force. So huge and important figures. But again, I think very important to be reading this in the context of what Manu has just been telling us, of course, which is that the real peril for Ukraine here is that U.S. funding may run out. And so I think you're going to hear these sort of staggering numbers, these Russian losses really talked about as evidence that, look, the Ukrainians are capable of exacting costs against the Russian military if they are provided with the military support to get it done.
What I want to speak on, and that's the end of that segment. Segment on TV. What I want to speak on is that how it's just like, why is it in U.S. interest? Why is it in the average person's interest, Americans' interest, that Russia be weakened? What does that do for us? You know what I'm saying? Like, what? So you're saying the goal of this military, our military participation is we are getting a good deal. We're not having to lose any bodies for this amount of money, and we're weakening Russia. And that's then the question has to be, weakening Russia for what? Do you have a answer or sort of a theory on what exactly, to the layperson? Now, I know militarily what they would say, but to a layperson, what exactly, is how is this beneficial to the average American? And I'll just leave it there. I'll leave it more open-ended.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's pretty clear that it's not beneficial to us. Another talking point that you're hearing from Biden now is, if we don't give this money to Ukraine and Russia wins in Ukraine, then they're going to roll into Eastern Europe, and that's NATO territory. That means direct war between the U.S. and Russia. That means we have to send your, U.S. troops, your sons and daughters over there to fight Russia. So that's just a complete nonsensical talking point. I think it's John Mearsheimer who always points out that before 2014, before the coup in Kiev and Russia taking Crimea and the start of the Donbass war, nobody in U.S. media ever claimed that Putin was trying to, roll into Eastern Europe, was trying to restore the Russian Empire, which became such a common talking point in the past, few years now. But that's how they have to sell it, that Russia is this big bad threat that, if we don't stop them here, then they're just going to keep going and going, then cross the Atlantic Ocean. But there's just no truth to that. And this actually makes war between the U.S. and Russia much more likely. I mean, the U.S. is supporting. There was this report in the Washington Post recently that didn't get much attention because all the Israel-Gaza stuff was happening, that basically detailed how the CIA helped build up Ukraine's intelligence agencies since 2014, funding them to tens of millions of dollars, and they're carrying out assassinations inside Russia. I mean, it's incredible that we haven't sparked a direct war with Russia already. So just the fact that that's their argument, that if we don't do this, we might have to fight a war with Russia, it's just such, it's so transparently just not a real argument.
It speaks to the power of the lobby, and I've been saying this, like a lot of lobbies' power has been on display in the different industries. You see the Israeli lobby, you see the weapons manufacturers lobby, really in both lobbying, both for Israel and Ukraine, but they're still trying to squeeze as much as they can out of this so-called war, proxy war, that everybody understands that they're never going to win, that they're never going to, take back these territories, Crimea. These are these are fantasies that they speak of. But I do want to pivot to Israel. I do want to give you a chance, if you had any final thoughts on Ukraine that you wanted to just get out there, any sort of breaking information, any updates on anything that you wanted to say before we pivot to Israel, because I want to make sure we keep this at about 60 minutes. But any final words on what's happening in Ukraine and the news of the funding?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that you could see the U.S., both the U.S. and Ukraine have realized or finally are being honest about the fact that Ukraine is not going to be able to win this thing on the battlefield. So even, these long-term plans that they have for Ukraine aren't related to any kind of victory. And if the U.S. didn't, get in the way of negotiations at the beginning of the war, Ukraine wouldn't be losing all this territory. That was just recently confirmed by a Ukrainian official who led negotiations with Russia in March 2022. I'm sure you guys went over that, basically confirming that Russia's main demand was neutrality and that the UK sent over Boris Johnson to basically speak for the West and say, we don't want to sign a deal. Let's keep fighting. Let's keep this thing going. So we always have to keep that in mind because, people are forgetting about all the pro-proxy war people at the time. If we covered that, accused the US and NATO of scuttling peace, we got attacked. But now that it's clear that that's true, they've just forgotten about it. And they're moving on to the next thing. And all the Ukrainians that are dying, they just don't care about it anymore.
Yeah, and I must say, I don't know what they're going to do about their military credibility to say, build all of this up about Putin. And then now you're just kind of like, we got a new war, shiny new war. Let's move on to that. Like, what about all the disastrous things you said is going to happen if Putin wins this war? And they're still kind of saying that in a couple of the clips that I played. So that is still sort of surprising with Ukraine, but that is the Ukraine front. Now, some of the latest news that's happening in Israel, or one of the latest stories that's happening in Israel that's, of course, connected here is the UN vote that was UN vote for ceasefire, I should say. Let me say the full thing. UN vote for ceasefire was blocked by the US. And I mean, Nick and I covered this story of the vote yesterday, and it's pretty despicable to see the actual vote. You see everybody in the world raise their hand for a ceasefire UN resolution, which is, again, this is just a resolution. And you can hear an audible sigh, and I reported this yesterday. You hear an audible sigh before the person that was leading the meeting, pivots over to the United States and then asks anybody that is that's voting against it. And the United States is the only one. They have to be this guy who, excitedly throws his hand up to vote for a genocide. Those are my words, genocide. And Netanyahu, you reported, Netanyahu says he appreciates U.S. veto of UN Gaza ceasefire resolution. And that's the headline. But could you speak to what you write about in this article about how Netanyahu is basically thanking the U.S. for allowing him to continue his genocide unrestricted? But what say you in this article and now?
Well, yeah, I mean, that what Netanyahu, by thanking the U.S. for blocking this resolution, it goes into kind of the different ways that the U.S. is supporting Israel in this war. It goes beyond just the weapons. It's political cover that they give them at the UN. It's, of course, the weapon shipments, which, according to the Pentagon, it's nearly every day they're shipping new weapons, which include very heavy bombs that they're just dropping on Gaza and slaughtering, all these children and innocent Palestinians. And other support, special operations support. They're flying surveillance over Gaza. They sent all these aircraft carriers into the region, basically threatening anyone that enters the war. So, I mean, it just goes to show that how much this is a U.S.-Israeli war. It's not just an Israeli war. And I think that's one of the reasons why Americans, just besides the moral argument for what Israel's doing in Gaza is for one reason why Americans should be so against their government supporting the slaughter, because to the Arab world and to most of the world, the U.S. is aiding and abetting what you characterize as a genocide. And I usually try to use that term, narrowly, but I think with what's happening in Gaza, I mean, it's very hard to argue against the fact that it's a genocide. And the rhetoric from Israeli officials makes that very clear, that they either want all the Palestinians to leave Gaza, they want to cleanse Gaza, or they just want to kill them all. And this idea that the U.S. is restraining them, you see these comments from Blinken, it's just nonsense, because the military aid that they're providing is unconditional. They say, oh, look, we're letting all these aid trucks in. That's us. That's because the U.S. pressured Israel to allow that. But then you see the UN and all the aid groups saying, with Israel resuming its operations and expanding them in the south, there's no relief happening. There's no relief going on. Palestinians are starving. If this thing continues for a few months and months and possibly a year, like the Israelis are saying it will, we're going to start seeing Palestinians die of starvation and disease and at a mass scale. So, that's what this symbolizes. The U.S. It's a resolution, like you mentioned. It's the UN. They can't really implement it. It's very symbolic. Yeah.
Yeah, and what you say in this article here. Let me read this section of the article. The U.S. is facing global backlash and criticism from fellow UN Security Council members for being the only one to vote against the ceasefire resolution, as Israel is killing civilians at an historical pace. The Security Council held the vote on Friday after UN Secretary General Anthony Guterres, I believe that's how you say it, invoked Article 99 of the UN Charter, which allows him to force a discussion if he believes international peace and security is at risk. So, is this resolution, if this resolution passed, that means Article 99 has been approved and now discussion is going to proceed? Is that basically what the U.S. has blocked? They blocked the UN from discussing this? Is that how I read this?
No, actually, Article 99 is what forced the UN Security Council to convene and discuss it and then vote on the resolution. I know the General Assembly is voting, I think today, possibly on a similar ceasefire, and the General Assembly includes basically all UN members. So it'll be interesting to see how that vote goes, because the UN Security Council is 15 members, 5 permanent, and then the rest rotate. But the General Assembly, I mean, again, it's all symbolic, even though a General Assembly vote was apparently enough to create the state of Israel. But if the General Assembly, if we see a big vote against this, I think, it does mean something, even though it's symbolic. I think there is pressure. And you have to think, can Biden just keep this thing going? Because there is real dissent coming from within the administration and from Democrats. If you're Israel, I think right now they're thinking let's keep going as hard as we possibly can. If Biden actually does jerk our chain, which he has the power to, he could cut, he has all sorts of leverage over Israel that he's not using. But if he does eventually do that, then I think the Israelis might think, all right, let's keep it more of at a lower pace, but keep the war going. And then if you get Trump or DeSantis coming in, then
they would love it.
They want unrestricted. Yeah. No, none of this aid business, they're just let them go all out. Which again, Biden is ultimately doing, but I think if the Israelis are thinking long-term.
Yeah. And, I do want to bring up this video. This is Biden warns that Netanyahu needs to change his government, because we're hearing more and more now, however slightly, crumbs, more and more where they're having to, in my opinion, sort of buy the pro-Palestinian, the anti-genocide voices that are saying stop this massacre, and because it's in his party and it's really affecting his polling, because two things are happening. Trump is going up separately from what's happening to Joe Biden, and Joe Biden is going down separately from what's happening with Donald Trump, and you hearing more and more rhetoric like we're going to hear, at least what they're reporting, because Joe Biden's not actually on video. They're saying this happened behind closed doors. So, we don't know if he actually said it, but at least let's listen and discuss.
This just in, a new candid message from President Biden on Israel. At a fundraiser in Washington just a short while ago, Biden told donors that Israel is losing support around the world, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu needs to change his hardline government. CNN's Arlette Saenz joins us from the White House. Wow, these are pretty stark.
Now, I don't know if she's really surprised that it happened, or she's really surprised that her writers wrote it on the teleprompter for her to read. Maybe she's surprised, or some other way. But is this very shocking to you? If this, if this story is true, is it very shocking for Joe Biden or any administration to say something like this about an Israeli prime minister, or Netanyahu specifically?
No, I don't think it's shocking, because we kind of saw Biden give Netanyahu the cold shoulder when he came back in at the end of December 2022, when Netanyahu's new government was formed, and it includes like very extreme elements.
Right.
This guy Bezalel Smotrich, who is his finance minister, Netanyahu also gave him basically control of West Bank settlements, and he's a settler who wants to push all the Palestinians out. So those are like the extreme elements that Biden's talking about. But so I think this is kind of the criticism that's like allowed. They could say, oh, it's this Netanyahu government that's so crazy that we need to change it, when really any real opposition in the Israeli Knesset right now, they're all supporting the war. They're supporting what's happening. And you see Bernie Sanders kind of do this too. He criticizes the Netanyahu government and the people in it, but not kind of generally what Israel is doing to Palestinians. And it's true that this government that came in is very extreme, very radical when it comes to the West Bank. And, before the October 7th attack, violence in the West Bank was the worst that it's been since like the early 2000s. It is true, it is definitely something to criticize, but I think it's kind of a safe way for Biden to criticize Israel without really criticizing the war.
Right. And I don't know, because you said, or you spoke to, or you alluded to Netanyahu saying that this war could last months, if a year, or like a year. And I would assume that the Biden administration is praying and hoping that it's nothing near a year, and they would be bringing this to a close within the next month or so. And that's what I would generally ask, is like, can a Biden administration survive this? I can't imagine the Biden administration, as the election get closer, continuing. Like, I would imagine his rhetoric would get more and more radical, more and more where he's saying, he's criticizing Israel as it gets closer, if they continue this. And I know I'm asking for more of an opinion, but what do you think of that question, or that dynamic presented? Like, how does he, being that the fact that 10 months out, he has to sort of insert vague pro-Palestinian sort of speech now? Imagine 4 months out from the election. Imagine, this is July, 4th of July, and it's still going on. And now we're talking about 70,000, dead. Like, I just can't imagine what would happen to his candidacy. But did you want to speak to that, or did you, did you want to go ahead and tackle that?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to predict what's going to happen in this next year. Like, I just can't, it's tough to think, even the 2024 election, like, who's even going to run? There's just so many things that are unknown. It's like Biden was already in trouble as it was before this started, and he's so old. And then you have Trump, the legal stuff, but he's really the only like Republican front runner by like a mile. So it's so hard to predict the election season stuff. And then same thing with this war. I can't really say how long this thing's going to last and at what rate. My best guess is, as I mentioned before, they're going to continue this kind of massive bombing campaign. I think right now they are trying to get Egypt to say, okay, all right, fine, we'll open the border, because they're starving these Palestinians and concentrating them in the south, near Egypt. I think that's probably one of the strategies. But I could see kind of this really heavy bombing campaign lasting a little longer, and then they're going to kind of narrow things down, try to get Hamas out of the tunnels or whatever they're going to do. But yeah, how is Biden going to survive that? Because it is real dissent from the Democrat side.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's crazy.
It's significant. Like, it's not nothing. So I don't know. I mean, how much does he love Israel?
So let's see. So let's listen to the rest of this segment, and we'll kind of wrap things up. There is one more headline that you reported on in Israel I want to bring up after this, but let's listen, because Dana Bash is pretty startled about this, what he's saying. And then let's listen to the reporter who actually reports on this.
CNN's Arlette Saenz joins us from the White House. Wow, these are pretty stark words from a president who has been, in a robust way, supportive of what the Israeli government has been doing.
Yeah, that's right, Dana. These are very candid comments, perhaps President Biden's most candid comments about the conflict between Israel and Hamas. The president made these comments at an off-camera, closed-door fundraiser. So we have a pool report that's offering some quotes from that. And it said that President Biden had warned that Israel was beginning to lose support amid its heavy bombardment of Gaza. And the president suggested that it may be time for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to change his government. The quotes say that Netanyahu has a tough decision to make, and quote, "This is the most conservative government in Israel's history," Biden said, adding that the government doesn't want a two-state solution. The president added that Israel was beginning to lose support around the world, and said Netanyahu, quote, "has to strengthen and change the Israeli government." But it does come, as you have seen President Biden very publicly stand shoulder to shoulder with Netanyahu, but there have been some warnings specifically about the campaign in Gaza and the mounting civilian casualties. There's been widespread criticism about that, and President Biden has warned Israel to take more caution to protect civilian life. But these are certainly some of the president's most candid comments, as he is warning that Netanyahu is losing support around the world.
Thank you so much for that, Arlette, and our reporters are back here. Jeff Mason, to me,
listen to this part.
Obviously, what Arlette was just reporting is kind of the headline that he said. He warned that Israel is losing support, but also the second quote, which explains maybe the first quote. This is the most conservative government in Israel's history, adding that the Israeli government doesn't want a two-state solution. Yeah. Am I reading too much into this to say that, never mind the war, that the administration is, and the president himself is starting to see a finish line for Prime Minister Netanyahu?
And that's where I wanted to have her go to, at least, because is all of this criticism, and I'll answer it before I pass it to you for your response, is all of this criticism, because I see it on Morning Joe a lot. I'm noticing the criticism of Israel is very narrow to Netanyahu and his administration. And is it because Netanyahu, I think the last time I read, he was at a 4% approval rating, and people want him out because prior to this, he was already on the way out, already was polling very bad, already had tens of thousands of people that were testing him and his government. So I'm just curious to sort of the timing of this critique of Netanyahu. But what say you to that last part before I move to one more part, and that's the white phosphorus part of this story. But what say you? Any final words on that? The last clip that we played there.
Yeah, it seems like there's definitely going to be a reckoning for Netanyahu. I mean, he's been, I think, the prime minister basically 13 out of the past 15 years, yes. And there's all these, reports that show Israel had all sorts of warning that Hamas was preparing something. They had their battle plan, basically, that they knew what Hamas was planning to do, and they didn't do anything about it, and the attack happened. And so Israelis are not happy with Netanyahu. At the same time, doesn't seem like they want to change the government while this war is going on, what they're doing in Gaza. So I think that's why if you're Netanyahu right now, the name of the game is keeping this war going. And the way he's selling himself, he had a meeting with some Likud members saying, look, you got to keep supporting me. I'm the only one who could prevent a two-state solution. I know how to deal with the Americans. That's how he was selling himself, and that's been his strategy.
He had you. I'm sorry to interrupt you. You said this. You've reported on this that or it has been reported that he actually said this.
Yeah. So this is according to Israeli media. So it was a quote from him from an Israeli, like not a direct quote that we saw him publicly make.
Right.
But it was Israeli, I think, TV. I wrote a story about it on antiwar.com. And that's what he said. I'm the only one who could prevent a two-state solution. So, and people should look. So Scott Horton, who's our editorial director, he wrote an article called Netanyahu's support for Hamas has backfired. And it's about the strategy of Netanyahu and other Israeli officials kind of to keep Hamas in power in Gaza as a way to split the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank to make a two-state solution less likely. And it sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, but this has been, if you read Israeli media, that they've been criticizing Netanyahu for this. There's a quote from him from 2019 that's, again, in a meeting with Likud members saying something like, if you oppose a two-state solution, you have to support Hamas, basically. And he was defending Qatari cash that was going into Gaza, going to Hamas. So, people in Israel are starting to really look back at that stuff. And so, politically, he's not in good shape.
That is, that's crazy because it sort of implies that he's funding Hamas. And I know this is what everybody's saying. He's funding Hamas so that they create chaos so that he can then say, see, we can't do a two-state solution with these savages. And it's sort of, not sort of, it is backfiring. This is one of one of a long list of things that the Israeli citizens out there, they really don't like him. I can't think of a politician who's at a 4% approval rating. I mean, even Nancy Pelosi is like at 17% or something. Like, I've never heard that before. But to that point, and Netanyahu, let's go to this final sort of headline that I brought up from antiwar.com, and that is Israel used U.S. supplied white phosphorus in attack on South Lebanon. And so what are you reporting in this story? And I'll leave it because I was going to summarize it up, but I'm going to allow you, the writer, to summarize what you're talking about in this story, in this headline.
Yeah, so this is based on a report from the Washington Post. They said that one of their journalists made it to the scene of an Israeli attack in South Lebanon, and it was a white phosphorus attack, which white phosphorus is a really nasty chemical that can burn skin on contact, all the way to the bone. It could damage organs and it could kill you. And it also, will burn anything in its path, basically, if it hits a house or any kind of buildings. And there were reports of Israel using this in South Lebanon and in Gaza. And so the Washington Post had a reporter make it to this town in Lebanon, and they found the artillery shells that had the white phosphorus in them. And based on the markings, they came from the U.S. So this is, technically the military use for white phosphorus is to either create a smoke screen so you could hide, the location of troops kind of as a shield. So, the enemy can't see where your soldiers are, or it can be used as an illuminator at night to illuminate targets. But
this case, is illegal. Just to be clear, white phosphorus is illegal, correct?
So like when it comes to internationally banned chemical weapons, I don't think it is. It's illegal to use as a weapon because they have these other uses for it. So it's illegal to use as a weapon, and it's illegal to use against civilians, obviously. But technically, if this was any other country using it, the U.S. would say, if it was one of their enemies using it, they would push to make it one of the banned weapons. But since Israel uses it actually quite a bit, and I know the Saudis have used it in Yemen, it's not technically on the list of like internationally banned chemical weapons. Some people even dispute calling it a chemical weapon, but it's a chemical that can be used as a weapon.
That can be as a weapon.
So, but yeah, so it turns out these were supplied by the U.S. and the people on the ground. It injured 9 civilians and it burned 4 houses to the ground. And the Israeli military says they only use white phosphorus as a smokescreen to protect their troops, but there were no Israeli troops on that side of the border in Lebanon. And this is part of the fire they've been exchanging with Hezbollah, which hasn't been a ground battle. They've just been firing artillery and airstrikes and stuff into Lebanon. So it's pretty clear that they were using it as a weapon. And it's, thanks to the USA for providing it.
Yeah. And let me just, it was a part. Oh, I'm sorry. It's a little bit further here. No, this is it. The Israeli military claims that, this is the part you just read. Another part here. Maybe I skipped it. This could be it. A journalist working for the Post found the remnants of, this is it. A journalist working for the Post found the remnants of 3 155 millimeter white phosphorus artillery shells in this city in Lebanon. The question I want to ask, do you have any sort of understanding on what that amount is? So for the audience to understand,
how much is packed?
Yeah, what is that? Yeah, what is that? Is that like a large amount, or this is like a small amount, that they found?
I mean, I don't really know exactly how to characterize it. I would say, when it comes to white phosphorus, 3 shells, I think, would be a pretty decent amount. But I'm not sure exactly, I can't say exactly how much or how much of an area it would cover. I'm not really sure.
Okay. Because I was just trying to get a scale, because if these 3 are able to incinerate 4 homes and some other items, that would mean that this is a pretty potent substance, and why we reported on it. And I think Nick has done a reporting on it when the claims was made that Israel was using white phosphorus. So if you're looking for that reporting, make sure you check out some of our past videos, Nick and CJ show. But we have come to the end. That's my daughter there. We have come to the end. Sit over there, sweetheart.
My 2-year-old's in the other room. I was worried he was going to be too loud.
Well, she busted through the door. Why don't you go back to your room, sweetheart? Go back to your room. So we've come to the end of our 60-minute episode, and I want to thank you for joining us. And like I said, we use antiwar.com all the time as a starting point for different resources on the different foreign policy stories that we cover. We retweet you all the time, and antiwar.com. So thank you again for coming on. And any final words, any new pieces that's coming up today?
Yeah, I appreciate you guys sharing our stuff. I've noticed it, retweeting our articles and stuff. Today, I wrote something about the U.S. is apparently threatening to kill a peace deal in Yemen because the Houthis are attacking ships in the Red Sea. So that's an area to definitely keep an eye on. But yeah, if people want to check out my work, it's all at antiwar.com. I write in the news section that's at the top of the page. I also have a daily podcast and YouTube show called Anti-War News. And yeah, it's actually our fundraiser now. So if people have the means and want to help us out, you could go to antiwar.com/donate. That's how we get by. We're entirely reader funded. But yeah, it's cool working for antiwar.com. It's been around. This website started in 1995. So, it's been around a long time, and we're libertarians who run the site, but we're a single issue, and we have columnists from all over the political spectrum, and always happy to work with people, on this issue.
Right. Absolutely. All right. And thank you so much again. I'm going to put you in the back. You can take off whenever you like. And I'm going to shout this out to everybody. I don't have the graphic yet, but we will have a second stream later today. Who is it? I'm sorry. The Post-Duopoly Show. We're coming to you at a slightly different time. Instead of 8 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be coming to you at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you stay tuned for that. That's in about 2 hours, actually. So I gotta get on board with getting that all set up. Let's see. Wow. This is Case Study QB. I'm just looking at some of his graphics here. And then we're actually going to play a video here. Let's see this here.
And I want to show you here in Michigan another problem.
Look at this here.
For Joe Biden, beyond the economy, beyond his age, we'll get into. It's these third-party and independent candidates. Look what happens when they're added to the ballot to Biden's number. So Trump's at 39%. He loses some support too. Biden goes down to 31%. RFK Jr. pulling 20% right now. Cornel West, 6%. We'll see if they can hold that level of support throughout the next year. And I want to show you here in Michigan another problem for Joe Biden, beyond the economy, beyond his age. We'll get into.
I know it does. I know it re-looped.
And independent candidates. Look what happens when they're added.
Wow. Yeah, I know they re-loop. I do that a lot of the time. 39% for Trump, 31% for Biden, 20% for Kennedy. I think that is very surprising to the establishment, considering all of the anti-vax stuff propaganda they push on him. And then Cornel West at 6%, which yeah, just leave it there. Let's see any other videos here that Case Study QB has. Netanyahu under fire as much.
Israel's mourning continues, even as the clamor around Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu grows, questioning whether his policies helped prop up Hamas. In a series of interviews with key Israeli players, CNN and the Israeli investigative platform Shomrim were told how Netanyahu allowed Qatari cash donations to Hamas for years without supervision, despite concerns from within his own government.
$30 million per month.
Okay.
$360 million. It's more than a billion shekel. That's simple mathematics.
It's a lot of money.
A lot of money. Dollar in Gaza is like $20 in US. For them, it was like relief. It was like oxygen. Can you live without oxygen? No. So it's dramatic, historic mistake.
Former Israeli Prime Minister and former Defense Minister Naftali Bennett says he was among those repeatedly raising concerns to Netanyahu. When Bennett became Prime Minister in 2021, he put a stop to the suitcases of cash to Hamas, moving the transfer of financial support to Hamas from cash to a UN mechanism.
I stopped the cash suitcases because I believe that's a horrendous mistake to allow Hamas to have all these suitcases full of cash that goes directly to rearming themselves against Israelis. Why would we feed them cash to kill us?
The cash deliveries were supposed to help, among other humanitarian needs, pay Gaza's civil servants. And pictures in 2018 showed workers lining up to receive $100 bills. Israel approved the deal in a Security Cabinet meeting in August 2018, during a previous Netanyahu tenure as prime minister. An Israeli official defended Netanyahu's decision, telling CNN successive Israeli governments enabled money to go to Gaza, not in order to strengthen Hamas, but to prevent a humanitarian crisis. That's true, but no one else approved it in cash. Former Prime Minister Bennett says that Netanyahu underestimated Hamas.
I think the approach towards Hamas was one of a sort of a nuisance type terror organization that can shoot rockets, can cause a bit of havoc here and there, but not much more than that.
So underestimate.
And
good work from Case Study, sitting through these things. Let's see what this one is. Disgusting.
What I do know, right,
big
is
tech
that there
companies.
is a pattern across academia of
big tech companies offering a great deal of funding, right? Academics of all kinds.
$500 million.
That's right. In that case, that's a nonprofit, the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation, giving a nonprofit contribution to create an AI center, right? But you have much more direct connections. There's a professor at Berkeley who told me about basically doing a partnership with Facebook to study deepfakes, getting about halfway through it and coming under some pressure to not speak critically in the press about Facebook any longer and saying, you know what, I'm out. And he returned more than $1 million back to Facebook because he said, as he told me, he considered it a quid pro quo.
Wow. Wow. All right. I think that'll be it for today. I got to get ready for the next show. And like I said, that's in about 2 hours, 3:30 West Coast time, 6:30 East Coast time. And here's one super chat we got. Thank you for this super chat. It says Putin for president to benefit all Americans. Okay. Thank you for that super chat. And that's Helpful Harm. Wow, an oxymoron for a name. And thank you again for those for that super chat. All right, everybody, make sure you come back in about 2 hours for the Post-Duopoly show. And thank you for watching. Hit that like button on your way out. Make sure you join our Substack. If you're not getting notifications, make sure you get on our Substack. Have a good rest of your day.